Hello there, everybody. I want to welcome you here to the Prog Monster. My name is Murph. This is a show that is dedicated to progressive rock, heavy metal, hard rock, and other forms of rock music. So tonight we're here live for an episode of Hammer of the Gods, quite possibly the final episode of Hammer of the Gods, but nevertheless, we are here for it tonight. And our topic is about Black Sabbath. Yes, Black Sabbath, that iconic band that came out in the early 1970s, late 1960s. Black Sabbath cometh. Yeah. Their first studio album released back in 1970. Kind of a bit of an eerie kind of looking album, to be honest. And I think part of the eeriness is the pictures were taken, of course, in 1970. They got that kind of old look to them. But you got this house in the background and all these trees, and on the backside, you got this going on. And you got some lady dressed like in a kind of a witch costume, I guess you might call it. So it's kind of a creepy looking album, really. So for me, this is, of course, and not just me, but many people who follow Black Sabbath, this is their first album. It's heavy as hell. It's got a kind of a almost a bluesy feel to it, but much heavier than a lot of albums of its time. And perhaps this is the kind of birth of heavy metal here. Maybe, you know. Other bands were making heavy inroads as well. Led Zeppelin, of course, on their debut album, which is probably even more bluesy than this one. You've got Budgie, another pretty heavy band from that time period. Deep Purple coming out with their In Rock album that same year. All these are pretty heavy albums. And in that time period, they weren't called heavy metal because the term didn't appear. I think the term, if I'm wrong, was coined on Led Zeppelin 2. Was it Led Zeppelin 2? I think it was Led Zeppelin 2, maybe have been Led Zeppelin 3 where they coined the phrase heavy metal. But this, by many accounts, is the first heavy metal album. You know, many metal people and heavy metal people look back to this album as the beginning of that time period. So I personally think that this is more hard rock and bluesy rock than it is actually heavy metal. But then I'm talking about it by the standards of today. And many of those albums I talked about a few minutes ago would be in that same thing. Maybe in that time period, they were thought as being heavier than hard rock. So maybe before they didn't have a phrase to call it, but maybe they were considered heavy metal by the middle of the 70s. Definitely they were all considered heavy metal. But then once you got into the speed metal and the death metal and all that of the 80s, 90s, and beyond, these would seem relatively tame by that standard. So I guess what they're saying, the needle for heavy metal moved far to the right, right? Not nearly as this is not nearly as heavy as that more modern stuff. Definitely doesn't have that metal picture, which is the dark, all the leather and chains and everything, and the heavier guitar, the twin guitar part, the faster paced drumming, the faster paced guitar. The whole image changed once you got into the Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and then to the kind of I don't know if you call them speed metal bands that came after that. So yeah, so like every kind of music, progressive rock being the main one, there was this kind of that's the biggest thing about metal and progressive rock. They both progressed in sound, whereas other genres basically had a sound that developed but stayed at a certain way. I think both these genres did not do that as much and kind of progressed in their direction and strength. And definitely, though, I think for myself, I think this is where it started. And I think that it will is considered to be the starting point for many metal people as well. And then Sabbath, of course, I think helped perpetrate this starting point too by their next several albums getting even heavier. Their next album was probably heavier than this one, more defined, um, more darkness to it than even this one. And then when you moved into Master of Reality with their third album, they had the sound caught up with the darkness, so you got a much more heavier stuff. I mean, yes, on Paranoid, you had songs like War Pigs and Iron Man, which are much heavier than what they were doing even on their first album. But once you got into Master Reality, the whole album was heavy, and some of it actually was faster paced, almost that speed metal sound. So maybe some prototypes for future genres, I guess. And even Volume 4 had its heavy stuff, Supernaut, Tomorrow's Dream, and even on, by the time they got the Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, even more heaviness, but also a lot of different stuff on that album. And then Sabotage again, more heavy stuff. But then they started to kind of mellow out a bit for a few albums there before Ozzy left the band. And then they got even a different sounding metal sound to them once Dio came upon. They became almost pure metal at that point. Yep. So for me, they evolved and became a different band by the 80s, but still um, giving depth to this being the kind of heavy sound that many people have come to know as being the metal sound for the genres to go forward. But that's just my opinion on it. I mean, if other people have a different opinion about it, that'd be great too. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other bands of that time period that were heavy. Some of them didn't quite make the splash that Sabbath did, but some of them did. Of course, the other two members of the big three metal bands of the time, Zeppelin and Deep Purple, made huge impacts when they came out with their much heavier sound, especially Deep Purple, I think. Deep Purple came out with In Rock, which was very heavy, but they continued along that road with Fireball and Machine Head. Whereas with Led Zeppelin, they came back with their Led Zeppelin 2, which was very heavy in many ways, but also very bluesy. Then they decided to go completely a different way in order to, I guess they wanted to prove that they weren't just that heavy blues metal sounding band. And then they went with Led Zeppelin 3, which is completely different than anything else. But those bands helped to form, the three of them helped to form that heavy kind of metal sound that would eventually take the world by storm. Now, the other band that I want to talk about is Budgie. Budgie, to me, is a very heavy band, hard rock band that over time began to evolve into a more metal sounding band. But I never really thought of them as metal until recently, when you look back at their sound, and compare that to Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, and they are right in there with them. They just didn't have the popularity that those three bands enjoyed. Maybe there's a couple of reasons why that was the case. I'm not 100% familiar with their contract with their record label, how well they were promoted, all that. Also, Bert Shelley's voice, when you listen to his voice and you compare that to Ian Gillan, Robert Plant, Ozzy Osbourne, who were more distinctive, more acceptable voices, his voice was a kind of not an easily digestible voice. And I think that may have been one of the reasons why they didn't really make that. Their music wasn't as catchy either for those who listen to them, they think it that kind of a bad choice for names didn't help their cause either. So they had some negatives that hurt them, I think, for sure. And you had other bands that sort of came along a little bit later, maybe half a decade later, with Judas Priest. Maybe one of the first really true metal bands. They crossed that line from hard rock to metal, with the Halford's voice being much more metal-like than any of his predecessors. And then also you had that twin guitaring, and then they started to develop the look as well. And their album started to develop that look as well. So they took the next step into the next realm. And I'm sure there was other bands during that time period that kind of started to go that way, the Scorpions being one of them. The Scorpions, to me, initially, early on, were a very hard rock band that bordered on metal as well, kind of like Judas Priest was, but also took that sound a little bit further, but maybe more in a commercial sound than maybe Judas Priest was doing, even though they eventually got there as well. Then you get those new wave of heavy metal bands that came after that, including, of course, Iron Maiden, Samson. Now people like to throw Def Leppard. Maybe early on, Def Leppard could have went in that direction, but they decided to take the more bubblegummy route, or if you want that kind of glam metal sound, lots of glam metal bands, of course, in the 80s. Guns N' Roses, of course, Motley Crue, which probably kind of a poster child for that kind of thing. But a lot of these bands eventually developing a metal sound, but not necessarily the kind of metal that would dominate in a few years' time, when you had bands like Slayer and Megadeth and Metallica and Anthrax come out much faster, much heavier, definitely more of a metal sound than any of those bands, for sure. So to me, this is where this thing kind of progressed, and now you have so many different genres of metal, it's hard to keep up with it. I don't love every type of metal sound too. I'm not as much into the black metal or the death metal or the even so much into the speed metal. I do like the more modern doom metal that came out of the Black Sabbath era. I don't mind that kind of stoner rock as well. That's good. I'm okay with that. Even some of the faster paced Iron Maiden like metal, I'm okay with that as well. It's just when it starts getting into so distorted and so heavy and so fast, it just loses me at that point. So I mean, I understand there's people that love this stuff. That's great. Good for them. I'm not going in that direction. I've listened to enough metal over the last couple of years to decide that that's not an area I want to go to. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I don't even, to be honest, it seems kind of weird, but I don't even really like the progressive metal as much as you would think I would, considering that I love progressive rock and I love metal. It seems like a great marriage, but sometimes the best marriages don't produce what you want it to produce. And I'm not a big fan of Dream Theater or Queensryche. I do kind of like Fate's Warning a bit, but not overly. I like them a little bit more when I initially got into them. I don't follow them as much now, but that's just, personal tastes. All this type of metal really catchy for a lot of people. And so, as they often say, whatever you like is what you should follow. And so I'm a big fan of that. So anyways, that's my take today on Black Sabbath Cometh, which is, are they really the godfathers of metal? Is Ozzy really the godfather of metal? Is metal, did it start here? Did Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, Budgie, and other bands like that around the same time period, did they contribute to making this a stronger album? What is your opinion? So anyways, you can leave any comments you want in the comment section below. If you want, you can also hit the like and subscribe. That would be great too. And it's all in all likelihood, this may be the last live stream for this series. I've decided, and it'll probably be the same for the hard rock one that I did on Thursday. I just decided that this isn't working as well as I hoped it would, and we will just stick with the stream I do on Sunday nights, which is my favorite one to do, which is Into the Progverse. And this spot, I have a couple of new shows that I want to introduce, and this is the spot that seems most like and best qualified to use. This is the best spot to use, and that's likely what I'm going to do. This will probably be something maybe I do on the odd time out, but I just think that, it was an experiment that I wanted to try. I haven't been really overly enthusiastic about it. I think maybe I will begin to start to move towards maybe doing some videos with other people as well. I've been talking about this for a couple of years, but I haven't really got into it, mostly because of work and my technical expertise on the computer. Although it's completely gotten so much better, I'm still not quite at the level I would like to be, but I'm going to try and use that time to get there. Anyways, I hope to see you all throughout the week, and take care. Have yourself a good evening, and we'll talk to you later. And goodbye here from Prog Monster.